The resort had been open all summer. By the third week of September, it was nearly empty. This was normal. The seasonal rhythm of a beach resort on the Atlantic coast meant that after Labor Day, the crowds thinned rapidly, and by mid-September, the property was operating at perhaps 15% capacity. A skeleton staff, a handful of guests, the long, quiet corridors and mostly empty dining room that the end of season always brought. Kara and her boyfriend had chosen this timing deliberately. They wanted the quiet. They wanted the beach to themselves. They wanted the particular luxury of a resort experience without the resort crowds, and they had found it here at a rate that would have been impossible 6 weeks earlier. They arrived on a Friday afternoon. The check-in was handled by a single staff member at a desk that had clearly been designed for 6 people working simultaneously. The lobby was immaculate and completely empty. Their footsteps echoed slightly on the marble floor in a way they would not have been audible during the peak season. The staff member was professional and pleasant and gave them a room on the 4th floor overlooking the ocean. He told them they were 2 of only 4 guests currently staying at the resort. Kara asked who the others were. He said a couple in the East Wing. He did not elaborate, and she did not push. Their room was exactly what they had hoped for. Large, clean, the ocean visible from the bed through floor-to-ceiling glass, the sound of the waves present but not intrusive. They spent Friday evening on the beach and had dinner in the dining room where they were the only guests, and the kitchen produced food that felt disproportionately good for 2 people eating alone in a room designed for 200. They went to bed happy. Saturday was everything a late-season beach day could be. Cool enough to be comfortable, warm enough for the water. The beach entirely theirs from one end to the other. They walked miles of it and swam and read and ate lunch at the beach bar, where the single bartender on duty seemed genuinely glad of the company. Saturday evening, they ate at the same table in the same empty dining room. Kara noticed the other guests for the first time. A couple, older than them by perhaps 20 years, sitting at a table on the far side of the dining room near the window. They were eating in complete silence, not the comfortable silence of people who had run out of things to say. Something more deliberate than that. Both of them looking at their plates, neither of them looking at the other, neither of them looking at the room. Kara mentioned them to her boyfriend. He glanced over and shrugged and said some couples were like that. She agreed and ate her dinner, but she watched them. They ate their entire meal without exchanging a single word or a single glance. They left the dining room without looking at anyone. On Sunday morning, Kara went down to the beach alone while her boyfriend slept in. She was walking along the waterline when she passed the couple from the dining room. They were sitting in 2 beach chairs side by side facing the ocean. She said good morning as she passed. Neither of them responded. She assumed they had not heard her over the sound of the waves. She walked on. An hour later she walked back. They were in the exact same position. Same posture, same angle, same fixed orientation toward the water. She stopped. She looked at them for a moment. Something about the stillness was wrong. Not the stillness of people relaxing, something more absolute than that. She walked toward them. She said good morning again more loudly. Neither of them moved. She walked around to the front of the chairs, so she was between them and the water. She looked at their faces. Their eyes were open, both of them, open and directed at the ocean. She said, "Excuse me." "Nothing." She reached out and touched the woman's arm. The woman blinked and looked at Kara with an expression of complete blankness, as though she was coming back from somewhere very far away. The man turned his head slowly and looked at Kara with the same expression. Neither of them spoke. Kara asked if they were all right. The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked back at the ocean and said they were fine. They were just watching. Kara asked what they were watching. The woman did not answer. The man did not answer. Both of them were looking at the ocean again. Kara walked back to the resort and went upstairs and woke her boyfriend and told him she wanted to leave. He asked why. She told him about the couple on the beach. He was quiet for a moment. Then he got up and went to the window and looked down at the beach. He stood there for a moment. Then he told her to start packing. She asked what he could see. He said the couple were still in their chairs. She asked if they were still looking at the water. He said no. She asked what they were looking at. He closed the blind. He said they were looking up at the window. They checked out within the hour. The staff member at the desk processed their early departure without comment. Kara asked him how long the couple in the East Wing had been staying. He looked at his screen. He said they had no guests in the East Wing. She said she had seen them in the dining room on Saturday evening. He looked at his screen again. He said the dining room log showed only one table occupied on Saturday evening, their table. Kara stood at the checkout desk and looked at the lobby around her. The empty marble lobby of a resort at the end of its season. The staff member smiled pleasantly and handed her the receipt. She and her boyfriend drove away without looking back. But she thought about 2 chairs on an empty beach, 2 people sitting in absolute stillness, watching the ocean, or watching something in the ocean, or waiting for something in the ocean to watch them back. And she thought about what her boyfriend had seen from the window that made him close the blind without describing it fully. She asked him about it once, months later. He said they had been looking up at the window. She asked what their expressions had been. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said they had not looked like people who had been caught watching something they should not have been watching. They had looked like people who were exactly where they wanted to be, doing exactly what they had come to do, and that the 2 of them leaving had been entirely irrelevant to whatever that was. Story 2, The Room That Wasn't Booked. James and his wife had been planning the trip for months. A week in Italy, Florence for 3 days, then south to a small town on the Amalfi Coast for the remainder of the week. A 40th birthday present to themselves, from themselves, justified on the grounds that 40 was significant enough to warrant something they would not normally spend. Everything was booked and confirmed months in advance. The flights, the Florence hotel, the Amalfi rental, a small apartment in a building that looked in the photographs like exactly the kind of place people imagined when they imagined Italy. White walls, terracotta tiles, a small balcony with a view of the sea. Florence was everything they had hoped. 3 days that moved at the pace of a city that had been doing this for centuries and knew exactly how to deliver on its promises. They drove south on the 4th day. The town they arrived in was small and steep and built into the cliff face above the sea in the way that Amalfi coast towns seem to exist slightly at odds with physics. Narrow streets, staircases instead of pavements, the ocean visible at the end of almost every turning. They found the building their apartment was in after 20 minutes of navigating streets that were not fully comprehensible to a GPS system. A woman met them at the door. She was the owner, warm and efficient. She showed them the apartment with the pride of someone presenting something they genuinely loved. It was exactly as the photographs had shown. White walls, terracotta tiles, the balcony with the view of the sea. She gave them the keys and left them to settle in. They unpacked and sat on the balcony with wine and looked at the Mediterranean turning gold in the late afternoon light, and agreed without saying it that this was worth every penny and every month of anticipation. That night they ate at a small restaurant 2 streets away and went to bed early from the accumulated tiredness of the drive. James woke at 3 in the morning. He lay still for a moment, orienting himself. New place, new sounds, the particular quality of a room you have slept in for the first time. Then he heard something that made him sit up. Movement from above, footsteps on the floor above the apartment. He lay still and listened. The building had 3 floors. Their apartment was on the 2nd. The floor above was the 3rd. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor above him. He assumed another apartment, another guest, someone awake at 3 in the morning for their own reasons. He lay back down. The footsteps stopped directly above his head. He lay still. They stayed there, not moving, not continuing across the room, just stopped directly above where he was lying. He looked at the ceiling. He lay there for several minutes with the footsteps stopped directly above him. Then they moved again, slowly, back across the room, then stopped again, then returned back and forth, slowly, as though someone was pacing. He got up in the morning and mentioned it to his wife. She had heard it too. She had assumed he was sleeping and had not wanted to wake him. That evening, when the owner came by to check that everything was satisfactory, James asked her about the apartment above theirs. She looked at him. She said there was no apartment above theirs. He said he could hear someone moving around up there last night. She said the 3rd floor of the building was not a residential space. He asked what it was. She was quiet for a moment. She said it was storage. She said it had been storage for many years. She said nobody went up there. James looked at her. He asked if she was certain. She said she was. She said the door to the 3rd floor staircase was kept locked. She looked at him with an expression that he found difficult to read. He asked her how old the building was. She said very old. She said parts of it were several hundred years old. She said buildings like this on the coast had histories that went back further than records. She smiled pleasantly and said she hoped they were comfortable and left. That night, James lay awake and waited. At 3 in the morning, the footsteps began again. Slow and deliberate directly above him, back and forth. He got up and went to his wife's side of the bed and shook her awake. He said he was going to look. She said, absolutely not. He said he needed to know. She said she was coming with him then. They found the staircase door at the end of the 2nd floor corridor. There was a lock on it, a heavy old lock that looked original to the building. James put his hand on the door. The footsteps were clearly audible through the wood. Slow, back and forth. He knocked on the door. The footsteps stopped instantly. Complete silence from above. He and his wife stood in the corridor and listened. Nothing. He knocked again. Nothing. They went back to the apartment and sat on the bed and looked at each other. His wife said she wanted to leave in the morning. He said they had 4 days left. She said she did not care. They left the following morning. They told the owner they had a family emergency. The owner looked at them with the same expression she had worn the previous evening. Not surprised, not concerned, just the patient expression of someone who had seen this before, who had perhaps seen it many times, and had long since stopped trying to explain the 3rd floor of a building that was several hundred years old, to guests who would not have believed her anyway. Story 3. the hiking trail that wasn't on the map. The four of them had been planning the trip for a year. 2 weeks hiking in a national park in the American Southwest, backcountry camping, trails that required permits and preparation, and the kind of physical fitness that all four of them had spent months building toward. They were experienced hikers, not expert level, but serious. They had done multi-day backcountry trips before, and they understood the basic principles that kept people safe in remote terrain. Tell someone your route. Carry more water than you think you need. Stay on marked trails. They broke the last rule on the 5th day. Not recklessly, not out of boredom. The decision made sense in the moment in the way that decisions that go wrong often make sense in the moment. They had been following a marked trail along a canyon ridge when one of them noticed a path leading off to the left through a break in the rock. It was clearly a trail, not a game path, not a scramble through random terrain, a proper trail, worn into the rock and earth by the repeated passage of feet over time. It was simply not on their map. It headed toward a section of the canyon they had been hoping to see, and their current trail did not take them close to it. They discussed it for 10 minutes. They agreed it was likely an unofficial trail, possibly maintained by locals or by other hikers who had been using it for years without it making the official maps. They took it. For the first hour, it was everything they had hoped. The trail led them through a section of canyon that none of them had seen anything like before. The rock formations were extraordinary. The light in the late afternoon moved through the canyon walls in a way that made all four of them stop repeatedly just to look. Then the trail changed. Subtly at first. It became narrower, less obviously worn. The kind of change that you noticed only in retrospect because each individual step looked fine, but the accumulation of them had led somewhere different. One of them said they should check the map. They stopped and checked. They had gone further than they thought. The canyon section they were in did not correspond cleanly to anything on the map. The trail they were on had taken them somewhere the map had not accounted for. They decided to turn back. This was when they noticed the cairns, stone cairns, the small stacks of rocks that hikers built to mark trails. They had been there along the path the whole time, but nobody had paid them particular attention. Now they looked at them more carefully. These cairns were not trail markers. They were too numerous, too close together, and they were arranged not along the center of the trail, but on either side of it, lining it, like markers indicating the edges of a boundary rather than the direction of a path. One of them counted 14 cairns on one side of the trail in a 30-foot section. Another noticed that some of them had objects placed on top of them. Not natural objects, small things, pieces of cloth, knotted cord, objects that had clearly been placed there by human hands with deliberate intention. The four of them stood on the trail and looked at the cairns lining both sides of it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then one of them said they needed to leave right now. Nobody argued. They turned around and walked back the way they had come. They walked fast without quite running because running felt like an acknowledgement of something they were not ready to acknowledge. They were 20 minutes back up the trail when one of them stopped. She said she could hear something. They all stopped. They listened. From somewhere behind them, from the direction they had come from the section of trail with the cairns. A sound, low, rhythmic, like a voice but not a voice, like a sound a person made but not a sound that was language. They walked faster. They did not stop again until they reached the junction with the marked trail. They made camp that night close to another group of hikers they encountered near a water source and did not mention what they had found. In the morning, they reported the unmarked trail to a ranger at the visitor center. They described its location as precisely as they could. The ranger listened carefully. He asked them to show him on the map where they had left the main trail. They showed him. He looked at the map for a moment. Then he looked at them. He said he knew the area they were describing. He said there was no trail there. One of them said they had walked on it for over an hour. The ranger said there were areas of the park that were considered significant by the indigenous communities whose ancestral land the park occupied. He said those areas were not on any public map. He said they were not places visitors were supposed to enter. He said the markers they had described, the cairns, the objects on top of them, were boundary markers. He said they indicated the edges of a space that was not meant to be crossed. He said he was glad they had turned back when they did. One of them asked what would have happened if they had continued. The ranger folded the map. He said he did not know exactly. He said people who had continued past those kinds of markers in other parts of the country had reported things he could not explain and did not try to. He said the general principle was simple. When a boundary is marked that clearly, it is marked for a reason. And the reason is not for the benefit of the people inside the boundary. It is for the benefit of the people outside it. He handed the map back. He said, "Enjoy the rest of your trip." He said, "Stay on the marked trails." He walked away without looking back, and the four of them stood outside the visitor center in the bright southwestern sun and thought about a trail that was not on any map, and cairns lining both sides of it like a corridor, and a sound from behind them that was like a voice but was not a voice, and the particular speed at which they had walked back toward the marked trail, and whether what they had felt in that moment had been fear or something older than fear, something closer to the instinct that kept early humans alive in landscapes that did not belong to them, and that were not shy about making that fact known.